My, male 50, wife, female 49, won't let me have, with anyone else in it. Me off. We've been married for over 18 years. We've raised a huge blended family, both adding children to the mix, and we've had our fair share of ups and downs along the road. We are sincerely in love and thought we had found the one when we met. We were both reared in a rigorous faith Mormon that forbade almost anything wicked. After a few years, we decided to quit the church since it no longer represented our worldviews. A few years later, we were both discussing some type of experimentation and slash or openness in our relationship. It seemed like fun, and since neither of us had done much experimenting in our teens, why not? We promised to let the other accept the opportunity if it occurred, understanding that we'd still be together. Our rule was simply no harm to either our relationship or the relationships of others. Skip forwards 18 months, and we both had nothing more than a few flirtatious conversations with others and gone to more parties than previously. My friend, male 35, had been over for drinks a few occasions, and one night it became late, so I went to bed. When I awoke the following morning, my wife informed me that they had had. She quickly apologized, a huge thing for her to do, to be honest, but I assured her it was okay. I struggled, and I mean truly crushing waves of agony on times. The idea was one thing, but in actuality quite another. But we had the agreement, so I went with it, and we spent the following few days reassuring each other that it didn't compromise with what we had made together. I was determined that this would not be the end of our relationship. It wasn't like she had an affair behind my back or something. After all, I reasoned, at the very least, I may be able to do the same at some time and be okay with it. I bumped across the person a few days later, and he was also sorry. I emphasized that it was okay since we had reached an agreement. He was ecstatic, and he ended up coming over twice. My wife soon asked if I wanted to join in and make it A, and so we did. Seeing her having with someone else while I was in the room was the craziest event of my life. But it occurred, and she quickly asked him if he could come over again. Jump forwards a few weeks, and the man now effectively lives with us, and we've been living in arrangement for approximately 6 months. Everything occurred without any forethought, simply flowing with the flow. It worked remarkably well for the most part. I got along well with him. He wasn't attempting to replace me, and he appreciated how open and honest we both were. Surprisingly, that was effective for both of us. I enjoyed watching her so content and turned on. She had no notion she had a thing for 2 males. Occurred on a near daily basis. The only drawback was that I felt a huge loss since I had no one-on-one time with her. I'd periodically request it, and the other man would leave us alone. We'd spend the night talking things over. She'd become defensive about the arrangement, and we couldn't come up with a method that worked for both of us. He'd go back to his FWB, which would enrage my wife, and the following day he'd be back at our apartment. This cycle continued for the most of the 6 months, with me requesting alone time with her, him leaving to his FWB, she being jealous, and us 3 reuniting. In 6 months, we probably spent approximately a week just the 2 of us. She also texted me many times while I was at work, asking if it was okay if they had without me. She also asked if they may come over if I was weary and wanted to sleep. I pointed out that they were having more regularly than she and I were, so I'd sometimes say please no, sometimes all right okay. I had no clue how frequently they had without me. While it's true that this man and this arrangement were a thing, and I often participated in, I was okay with, and even loved, a lot of it. But it was much too often, and it entirely replaced our relationship for the 6 months it lasted. I did suffer a lot of times, and it wasn't always easy. I was hard on several times, especially when they continued after I had fallen asleep or while I was at work. What bothered me was that she desired it. To some extent, she had encouraged me to find someone for myself at the time. It seemed to be more of a gesture than anything else, since she and the other man both constantly said that they could not have dealt with what I had dealt with. To be honest, I was so engrossed in this that I didn't even consider my own playing outside of the marriage. The arrangement ended when I got resolved to spend some alone time with her for a week or 2, and he went back to his FWB, and my wife messaged him to cease it. She expressed dissatisfaction with just being one of his possibilities. So far as I knew, that was the end of it. I have some proof that they may have continued to have together for a time, but honestly, over it since after all, they'd been for 6 months. I eventually got a job in another town 3 hours away, so she and I moved away together. As far as I know, they have discontinued all communication. She claims she never loved him and that it was never a romantic relationship. That is what I believe. What a tale, eh? So here we are a year later in our new apartment, and she says she regrets the entire thing and never wants to speak about it. We're here now, so let's just enjoy us. I agreed that we needed time to reconnect and establish our boundaries, but all of the discussion about us not being open came from her. I've grown to like messaging someone, female 35, and despite this, my wife is getting quite possessive and jealous, and she gets irritated if she sees me texting her. She claims that we went through our experimental period and that we are no longer open since we learnt our lessons. If I bring up the 6 months she had her lover living in our house, she gets enraged and yells at me. She seems to believe that I'm just bringing up the past, about a year ago, to hurt her since she is terribly embarrassed of the whole experience and simply wants us to be a normal relationship again with conventional monogamy as the only choice on the table. She's remarked that I was just as into it as she was, so I've had to be clear about this. I wanted time alone with her, but I seldom got it. She claims that all I want to do is someone in order to exact retribution. I don't feel this way, but I do believe it's hypocritical and unjust for her to gain from our openness while denying me the same. As unpleasant as that may seem, the thought of obtaining something for myself did help me deal. So, Redditors, what should I do? Yes, I can live happily with this lady, I adore her, and we get along well. But I also don't enjoy feeling controlled or exploited, and to be honest, I'm 50 though we both seem to be in our 30s, and I believe it's quite reasonable to desire something exciting at my age, particularly considering all I've done for and with her. Should I preserve the peace and stick to monogamy, or should I press for equality in all areas and have a good time? Story 2. 1 year ago today, I caught them together. I saw my ex-husband and his girlfriend together at her property a year ago today. He had been having an affair for almost a year but was in denial about it. He acknowledged at one point, but then said it was all finished and put everything on me. He couldn't explain why I was causing him to be in a relationship with someone else, but it screwed me up. I started overdoing things, giving him showers, massages on demand, and so on, but he was still seeing her. While cleaning up the attic, I discovered an old iPad that was linked to his account. It was jam-packed with their words. He kept denying the affair, so I knew I had to capture him and prove it to him. After weeks of following the texts, I discovered he was bringing her up from the airport, and I felt this was my chance to confront them. On a runner, so I dressed up and started jogging up and down her street about the time I expected they'd return. I videotaped them exiting his vehicle and entering her property. I left them for about 10 minutes and phoned him to tell him I was outside. I kept an eye on the property and saw lights going off in windows, assuming it was her apartment and they were keeping an eye on me. I waited and waited, but he never arrived, so I returned to the front entrance of the property when I saw his vehicle lights turn on. He was about 200 meters up the road, and I dashed towards his vehicle, knowing he had gone over the wall and intended to drive away so he could persuade me I was insane and he was never there. I couldn't let him get away, so I ran after him. I made a lot of noise, and he ultimately stopped. He closed the vehicle door, and I started beating it until he let me in, which he did and couldn't really deny any more. He threatened to end things with her, but I told him it was over. It's been a year, and I've had a year to digest this. I was married to this man for 18 years before he left me for a 25-year-old. He had purchased her a vehicle, paid her rent, and they had even gone on vacation to Egypt together. He abandoned me with a kid, and, to this day, blames everything on me. I'm undoubtedly happy as time passes, but I could never envision myself in another relationship.